In October of 1987, a husband and wife vanished from Willow Creek Farm, a remote property outside Brenham, Texas. Dinner was still on the table. The door was unlocked. Their truck was parked in the drive, but John and Evelyn Clark were never seen again. For nearly 4 decades, their disappearance has haunted Washington County. A story of small-town whispers, buried secrets, and a farmhouse that has never quite given up its ghosts. If you're new here, subscribe for more investigations into America's darkest, unsolved mysteries. Willow Creek Farm had stood for almost 100 years, set back from the highway, its nearest neighbor a mile down the road. The farmhouse had been built by German immigrants in the 1890s, raised from the soil like everything else around it. Time hadn't been kind. The white clapboard siding curled at the edges, the porch sagged, and the tin roof groaned in storms. But the Clarks had kept it alive, planting corn, tending a small herd of cattle, and living quietly in their patch of Texas earth. On the morning of October 15th, 1987, neighbors saw John Clark mending a fence along the south pasture. That evening, Evelyn was spotted at the grocery store in town, paying for bread and coffee with exact change. By the next night, both were gone. The farmhouse light still burned when a farmhand arrived to collect hay bales. The table was set for 2, plates half filled, glasses of sweet tea sweating in the October air. Upstairs, the bed was turned down. Nothing appeared forced. Nothing was taken. It was as if the Clarks had simply stood up from the table and walked out into the night. The sheriff at the time, Bill Renner, led dogs across the pastures. They caught a scent near the windmill, then lost it in the mesquite brush. The farmhouse was combed for prints, for blood, for signs of a struggle. Nothing. Weeks turned into months. The search parties dwindled. Theories multiplied, a robbery gone wrong, a planned disappearance, foul play by someone they knew. But with no bodies, no suspects, and no evidence beyond a dinner that had gone cold, the Willow Creek case went quiet. Quiet, but never forgotten. For every October since, neighbors claimed strange things. Lights in the windows, voices on the wind, shadows in the corn rows. A property once alive with work had become a place where people drove faster, eyes fixed straight ahead. And then, in 2023, the farmhouse sold at auction to an Austin-based journalist, Claire Donovan, who'd grown up hearing the whispers. She wasn't buying it for the land. She was buying it for the story. She wanted to know what happened to John and Evelyn Clark, and Willow Creek Farm was finally ready to talk. The farmhouse looked smaller up close. Claire stood at the edge of the gravel drive, her boots crunching, her recorder already in hand. The October air carried a dampness, the scent of soil after rain. She had driven from Austin that morning, 3 hours on the interstate, and then smaller and smaller roads until she reached this place, forgotten by nearly everyone except for those who had whispered about it for years. She clicked on the recorder. Day 1. Arrival at Willow Creek Farm. The Clark farmhouse hasn't been occupied in 36 years. Local stories call it cursed ground. But I've always believed silence means someone is still keeping a secret. She turned the key in the door. The lock stuck at first, then gave with a reluctant click. The air inside was stale, heavy with dust. Light cut through the windows in thin slices, illuminating furniture draped in yellowed sheets. Her eyes landed on the dining table. Though cleared long ago by investigators, something about it felt staged. 2 chairs pulled out, one slightly farther than the other. Claire set down her bag and traced her fingers along the grooves of the oak surface. She could almost see them there. John, his shoulders broad from farm work, Evelyn with her soft laugh. Plates of food cooling in front of them. Conversation cut short. The silence pressed in. She moved through the room slowly, methodically. Recorder in hand, narrating as she went. The kitchen smelled faintly of old wood and mildew. The upstairs bedroom showed the faded pattern of floral wallpaper peeling in strips, She paused at the closet, imagining Evelyn's dresses once hanging there. Downstairs, she found the cellar door. The hinges groaned when she opened it, revealing stairs that descended into darkness. She aimed her flashlight beam downward. The steps were wooden, worn in the center. At the bottom, shelves, glass jars clouded with the ghosts of pickled vegetables. And something else. A chair, placed squarely in the middle of the dirt floor. Claire's breath caught. She stepped closer, sweeping the light over the chair's legs. On the ground, the faintest etching, almost erased with time, but still visible if you knew to look. Scratches, dozens of them, as if someone had dragged metal across stone, over and over. Her heart quickened. She clicked the recorder. Basement contains a single wooden chair, evidence of scratching on the floor, possibly from the chair itself or... Restraint, sir. She shut it off. The cellar's silence felt alive, watching her. When she climbed back into daylight, her phone buzzed. A text from Sheriff Alan Booker, the current head of Washington County Law Enforcement. I hear you're digging into Willow Creek. Don't stir up ghosts you can't put down. Claire pocketed the phone and looked back at the farmhouse. The white paint peeled in strips, the windows blank as eyes. Ghosts were exactly what she'd come for. The small-town diner sat at the corner of Main Street, its windows fogged with steam from the kitchen. Claire slid into a vinyl booth and ordered coffee she didn't need. She had driven into Brenham that morning to find the people who remembered the Clarks not as a case file, but as neighbors. She unfolded her notebook. October 16th, 1987. That was the date the Clarks were officially reported missing. Evelyn's sister had made the call when no one answered the farmhouse phone for 2 days. By then, the farmhand had already told deputies about the empty table and the lights left on. The bell above the diner door jingled. A man in his 70s shuffled in, his hat pulled low. Claire recognized him from the research she'd done. Henry Whitaker. He had been the farmhand, the one who found the farmhouse silent. She waited until he'd ordered his eggs and bacon before sliding into the booth across from him. "Mr. Whitaker?" she asked. His eyes lifted slowly, blue, clouded with age but sharp behind the wear. "You're her." The reporter bought the Clark place, Claire Donovan. "I'm working on a project about what happened." He shook his head. "Ain't nothing happened." He reached for his fork. "They just left." "That's what the file says," Claire replied. "But you don't believe that." Henry stabbed at his eggs but didn't eat. "I worked that land with John. Man loved that farm more than life. Evelyn, too. She was a Sunday school teacher, always talking about fixing the place up, planting pecan trees for her grandkids. People like that don't walk away. Then what do you think happened?" Henry's gaze dropped to the table. His voice lowered. "Somebody wanted them gone." Claire waited. Silence filled the space between them. He didn't elaborate, only sipped his coffee and glanced at the door as though afraid someone might overhear. Finally, he set down his fork. "Don't go stirring it up, Miss Donovan. Folks around here, they've learned to leave Willow Creek quiet." She pressed gently. "You found the house, didn't you?" "That night?" His eyes flickered. "Wasn't night. Morning after. Came for the hay. House was lit up. Both chairs pulled out. Food on the table. Evelyn's purse still hanging by the door. I stepped back out before the silence could swallow me. Drove straight to the sheriff. Claire wrote quickly, her pen scratching. "Did you ever go back?" Henry's face hardened. "Once, to help search. Dogs ran circles till they cried themselves hoarse. After that, never again." The waitress refilled their coffee. Claire closed her notebook. Henry's hands trembled slightly as he lifted his mug. As she slid out of the booth, he called after her. "Miss Donovan?" She turned. His voice was almost a whisper. "That house, it keeps things. Don't let it keep you." The library smelled of dust and aging carpet. Claire requested the old microfilm reels. the kind with clunky machines no one used anymore. The local paper's October editions unspooled before her. Farm couple vanishes without trace. Search for John and Evelyn Clark. Expands to neighboring counties. No evidence of foul play, sheriff says. She scanned the grainy photographs. John, stocky and smiling, standing with a prize bull. Evelyn, delicate-featured, dark hair pulled back, eyes bright. Together, they looked like a pair who had never once imagined their lives could end in mystery. An article from 2 weeks later caught her attention. Sheriff Renner addresses rumors of cult activity. The piece quoted townspeople whispering about strange gatherings in the woods near Willow Creek, fires burning at night, chanting carried on the wind. Sheriff Renner had dismissed it as hysteria. Claire leaned back. Cults always the easy story in the 80s. But sometimes easy stories hid inconvenient truths. She scribbled a note. Interview Sheriff Renner. Ask about cult activity. By late afternoon, she was back at the farmhouse. The sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows across the yard. She parked near the barn and sat with the engine running. For a moment, she almost drove back to Austin. Instead, she killed the engine and stepped out. The cicadas screamed from the brush, filling the silence Henry had warned her about. Inside, the farmhouse seemed darker than before. She moved through it with her recorder on, speaking softly. October 12th, 2023. Evening entry. Returned after interviews. Notice the kitchen window looks out toward the tree line where rumors of bonfires surfaced in '87. Possible direction to investigate. She stopped at the cellar door again. Her flashlight beam swept over the chair, over the scratches carved deep into the floor. She crouched, touching one with her fingertip. The mark was long, deliberate, not random scraping, almost like tally marks. Her stomach tightened. Upstairs, the floorboards creaked. Claire froze, her light jerking toward the ceiling. The house was supposed to be empty. She killed the flashlight and waited, breath shallow. Silence pressed down, broken only by the ticking of an old clock in the hall. Finally, she forced herself to climb the stairs. Each step groaned under her weight. At the top, the hallway stretched long and narrow, doors open to empty rooms. She reached the last one. Evelyn's sewing room, according to the file. A small chair by the window. Shelves bare. Nothing there. And yet, she couldn't shake the certainty that someone had been standing in that hallway a moment before. Back downstairs, she locked the door behind her and sat in the car until her hands stopped shaking. On her phone, a voicemail waited. Sheriff Booker's voice was low, urgent. "Ms. Donovan, you need to quit this. You don't know what you're opening. The Clarks aren't the only ones who disappeared out there." Claire replayed it twice, staring at the dark outline of the farmhouse. The house wasn't empty. It was full of silence, of whispers, of something that had never left. And she wasn't leaving either. Claire slept poorly her first night at Willow Creek Farm. The farmhouse was too quiet, every groan of the timber too sharp, every whisper of wind through the windows too human. She left a lamp burning, notebook open beside her, voice recorder still running as if documenting the night might keep the silence at bay. By morning, her coffee was lukewarm before she realized she hadn't closed her eyes for more than a handful of minutes. She played back the recorder, mostly static and creaks. But at the 43-minute mark, just before midnight, something else. A sound like faint humming. She played it again, headphones pressed tight. The hum rose and fell, irregular, almost tuneless. It didn't match the wind or the buzz of the old refrigerator in the kitchen. And it didn't sound mechanical. It sounded like a voice. She marked the timestamp in her notes. The county courthouse sat in the center of Brenham, its red brick exterior worn but proud. Claire climbed the marble steps with a list of case numbers in hand. She had spent the morning combing archives online, and she'd found references, brief, easily overlooked, to disappearances that predated the Clarks by decades. Inside, the clerk, a woman with sharp glasses and sharper eyes, eyed Claire's request with suspicion. Most of these files are old. We don't usually hand them out. I'm not asking to take them, Claire said. Just to view them. I'm working on a documentary. The woman hesitated, then disappeared into the back. When she returned, she carried 3 thin folders, each yellowed and fragile with age. She set them down as if they might crumble. Don't bend them, she warned. Claire thanked her, then opened the first. 1934. Joseph and Ruth Miller. Reported missing from their farmhouse off Willow Creek Road. Search conducted. No trace. Case closed as unresolved. The second folder. 1951. Martha Hughes, widow, reported missing. Last seen hanging laundry in her yard, adjacent to Willow Creek farm property. Clothing still on the line when neighbors checked. Case closed, unresolved. The third was the thinnest. 1969. Curtis and Helen Price. Vanished from residence off County Road, 215, 2 miles from Willow Creek Farm. Dinner dishes on table, radio still playing. No signs of struggle. Case unresolved. Claire sat back, her pulse thudded in her ears. 3 disappearances, spread across 50 years, all within a stone's throw of the Clark farmhouse. The clerk returned. Find what you were looking for? Claire closed the folders slowly. More than I expected. That afternoon, she drove to the edge of Willow Creek itself, a shallow winding stream cutting through scrub brush and pasture. The land rolled gently, deceptively peaceful under the autumn sun. She parked on the shoulder and walked the bank, notebook in hand. 1934, 1951, 1969, 1987. A pattern, not just coincidence. 4 disappearances tied to this land. She stopped at a patch where the creek bent sharply, the bank rising into a tangle of mesquite trees. Something about the stillness unsettled her. The water was low, trickling over stones. In the mud at the edge, she saw faint impressions. Boot prints, maybe days old. She crouched and touched the damp earth. Whoever had been here, they hadn't lingered. The cicadas droned louder. She straightened, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved, yet the feeling persisted. Eyes on her, hidden. Back at the car, she glanced in the rearview mirror. For a second, she thought she saw movement, a figure slipping into the brush. But when she turned fully, the bank was empty. She drove faster than she meant to, gravel spitting under her tires. That evening, she arranged the case files across the farmhouse table. 4 sets of names, 4 vanishings. She spoke into the recorder. Common details, all couples or families, all last seen at home, meals left uneaten, belongings untouched. No evidence of robbery, no recovery of remains. Local legend paints Willow Creek as cursed ground, but historical records suggest deliberate disappearances, as if someone has been harvesting families from this land every generation. The word harvest hung in the air, heavier than she intended. Her phone buzzed, an unknown number. She answered. A man's voice, low and strained. Stop digging, or you'll end up like them. The line went dead. Claire sat frozen, the files spread before her. Outside, the wind rattled the barn doors. The next morning, she met Sheriff Alan Booker in his office. A cramped room in the county building, walls lined with deer antlers and photographs of deputies at charity events. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. You're making people nervous, he said. Because I'm asking questions about 4 unsolved disappearances? Because you're asking them here. Some stories are better left where they died. Claire set her recorder on the desk. Sheriff, you said the Clarks weren't the only ones. You knew about the earlier cases. His jaw tightened. I know a lot of things that aren't in your neat little files, things you won't want to hear. Tell me anyway." For a long moment, he stared at her, weighing something. Then he leaned forward. "My father was a deputy under Sheriff Renner in '87. Before that, my grandfather worked the Miller case in '34. My family's been cleaning up after Willow Creek longer than I've been alive." "Cleaning up?" Claire asked. Booker's voice dropped. "People don't just vanish. They're taken. And every time the land swallows the evidence, like it's working with whoever, or whatever, is doing it." Claire's skin prickled. "Are you saying you believe in the curse?" "I'm saying," Booker said flatly, "that in Washington County, some things are older than the law, older than memory, and they don't let go." She pressed. "Do you know who took the Clarks?" Booker's eyes flicked to the window. "Maybe the better question is who let it happen." Before she could ask again, he stood. "That's enough for today. Go back to Austin. Make your documentary about barbecue joints or football rivalries. Leave Willow Creek buried." But Claire had already decided. She wasn't leaving. That night, she sat on the farmhouse porch, notebook open on her lap, flashlight beam cutting across the yard. The cicadas had gone silent. Only the wind moved, rustling the corn stalks left standing at the field's edge. She thought of the files, the Clarks, the Prices, Martha Hughes, the Millers. Generations erased, but not forgotten. Her recorder caught her voice, low and steady. If silence means secrets, then Willow Creek has been shouting for almost a century. 4 families, 4 vanishings, and something still watching from the fields somewhere beyond the tree line. A dog barked, then cut off sharply. Claire gripped the flashlight tighter. The farmhouse loomed behind her, its windows black, its walls breathing with the memory of everyone who had disappeared inside. She whispered into the night, "What are you keeping?" The wind shifted, carrying the faintest sound back to her. A hum, low, broken, like the one she'd recorded the night before. And this time, she was sure it wasn't the wind. Claire decided her next step couldn't be more police files or newspaper clippings. Paper didn't talk back, but people did if you asked the right way. She started with Evelyn Clark's family. According to public records, Evelyn's younger sister, Margaret, still lived in a nursing home just outside of Houston. 79 now, frail, and in declining health, but alive. Alive, and one of the last people who could still give voice to who Evelyn had been before she became a ghost story. Claire drove east for 2 hours, the highway stretching flat and endless. The autumn sun hung low, casting heat waves off the asphalt. She rehearsed her questions aloud. What was Evelyn like? Did she have enemies? Did she seem afraid before the disappearance? The nursing home smelled of antiseptic and overcooked vegetables. Claire signed in, following a nurse down a hallway where televisions flickered in dim rooms. Margaret Clark sat by the window, a blanket over her knees, white hair pulled back in a loose bun. Her hands were thin, blue-veined, but her eyes, sharp and gray, lifted when Claire entered. "You're not family," Margaret said before Claire introduced herself. "No, my name is Claire Donovan. I'm a journalist. I bought your sister's old farmhouse." The older woman's gaze sharpened. "That place again?" She turned back toward the window. "It's been nothing but sorrow for me." "I know this must be difficult," Claire said softly, pulling a chair beside her. "But I'm trying to understand what happened. I think Evelyn's story deserves to be told. Margaret was silent for a long time. Finally, she asked, "Do you believe she's dead?" Claire hesitated. "I believe she disappeared. And I believe people don't just vanish." Margaret's lips pressed thin. Evelyn was a good woman. Too good. She thought the world was kinder than it is. She trusted too easily. Did she ever talk about being afraid? Of someone or something? Margaret's fingers tightened on the blanket. She said the farm had a presence. That sometimes she'd be out in the yard and feel eyes on her. John told her it was nonsense, just coyotes in the fields. But Evelyn... Margaret's voice faltered. She said it felt older. Like the land was waiting for something. Claire's pen scratched furiously in her notebook. Did she ever say what she thought it was waiting for? Margaret's eyes met hers, suddenly fierce. Not what? Who? Claire felt a chill. Did she ever mention names? Anyone she didn't trust? Margaret shook her head. No, but she said once that if anything happened to her, I should stay away from Willow Creek. It doesn't let go, she told me. I didn't understand then. I do now. She leaned closer, gripping Claire's wrist with surprising strength. Leave that house, Miss Donovan. Before it takes you too. The drive back to Brenham was long and restless. Margaret's words echoed in her head. It doesn't let go. By the time she returned to the farmhouse, twilight had already bled across the fields. The place loomed against the darkening sky, its silhouette jagged, almost predatory. Claire parked and sat in the car until the cicadas began their nightly chorus. She recorded a note. Interview with Margaret Clark suggests Evelyn feared something at the farmhouse, a presence she believed was waiting for her. Mentions land that doesn't let go. Consistent with generational disappearances, possible psychological effect of isolation, or something more inside. The house smelled faintly of damp wood and iron. Claire lit a lantern and spread Margaret's testimony across her thoughts like puzzle pieces. Evelyn had sensed something. So had others. Was it paranoia, folklore, or had the land itself been keeping score? She climbed the stairs to the sewing room, where she'd felt watched before. The air was colder here, heavier. She stood by the window, looking out across the cornfields. In the dim light, the rows looked endless, like dark corridors waiting to swallow anyone who entered. She thought of Margaret's warning. It doesn't let go. Behind her, the floor creaked. Claire spun, heart hammering. The hallway was empty. Her pulse slowed, but unease lingered. She returned downstairs, telling herself she needed rest. But instead of sleeping, she opened the cellar door again. The chair was still there, alone in the dirt-floored basement. Her lantern threw long shadows against the stone walls. She crouched by the scratches, counting them. 1, 2, 3, 12. 12 tallies carved deep. She touched the last one. The edges were sharp, not softened by time. Someone had made it more recently. Her throat tightened. Someone's been down here, she whispered into the recorder. A sudden noise snapped her head up, a faint shuffle above, near the kitchen. She killed the lantern, plunging the cellar into darkness. The silence was suffocating. She held her breath, straining to hear. Another shuffle. Closer this time. Claire crept up the stairs, heart in her throat. At the top, she eased the cellar door open. The kitchen was empty, but the back door stood ajar. She was certain she had locked it. Her hands trembled as she closed it, sliding the bolt into place. Someone had been inside the farmhouse, and they had left a mark in the cellar to remind her she wasn't alone. That night, sleep never came. Every creak of the house, every whisper of wind through the rafters sounded like footsteps. Claire sat at the dining table, lantern burning low, eyes fixed on the case files spread before her. 4 families erased. A land that doesn't let go. Scratches on the cellar floor still sharp from a hand that wasn't gone. She whispered into the recorder, voice raw from fatigue. The Clark disappearance isn't just an isolated tragedy. It's part of a cycle. Families vanish, decades apart, always tied to Willow Creek. And someone, maybe something else, is keeping count. Her eyes flicked toward the cellar door. She couldn't shake the certainty that whatever waited down there was still counting. The Brenham retirement home sat behind a line of pecan trees, their bare branches clawing at the gray sky. Claire parked and stared at the brick building, her nerves rattling. Sheriff Emmett Renner had been in his 40s when the Clarks vanished. Now he was 83, half blind, and, according to his nurse, prone to wandering stories. Still, he was the last official voice of that case. The file had his signature on every page. Claire needed him. The nurse led her into a sunlit day room where residents sat in wheelchairs facing a muted television. Sheriff Renner was by the window, wrapped in a blanket, a Stetson resting crookedly on his knee. His white hair stuck up in tufts, but when Claire introduced herself, his pale eyes sharpened. "You're sittin' on that farm," he rasped before she even explained. Claire froze. "You know about it?" Renner gave a humorless smile. "Everybody knows about Willow Creek. Doesn't mean they talk about it." "I'm trying to," Claire said. "I want to know what happened to the Clarks. You were the one who handled the case." He tapped the brim of his hat, thoughtful. "Handled? That's generous. I was young, cocky. Thought I could write the world into order if I kept neat reports and asked the right questions. But that place..." His eyes slid to the window. "That place made fools of us all." "Tell me," Claire urged. Renner shifted in his chair, the blanket slipping from his bony shoulders. "We got the call October 17th, 1987. Neighbor hadn't seen John or Evelyn in 3 days. Mail piling up, animals unfed. Place looked normal, but the Clarks were gone. No signs of forced entry. Coffee cup still in the sink, bed unmade, just gone." He swallowed. "Search team scoured the property. Dogs, too. They'd pick up a trail, then lose it right by the creek, like the scent hit a wall. Same every time. Could they have run away? Witness protection, debts?" Renner's laugh was dry and cracked. "That's what the county judge wanted us to say. Easier than admitting you don't know a damn thing. But I saw Evelyn's shoes by the back door, neatly lined. Her coat still hanging by the hook. John's truck in the shed with half a tank of gas. People don't run without coats, without cars, without their lives. They were taken." Claire leaned forward. "By who?" Renner hesitated, his eyes glassy. "Some of my men swore they saw lights in the field the night before we got the call. Said it was just kids with flashlights. I checked. No footprints, no beer cans, no cigarette butts. Nothing." He lowered his voice. "But I found something else in the cellar." Claire's pulse quickened. "What?" Renner's hand shook as he gripped his cane. "Tallies. Scratched into the wall. Same ones you probably seen by now. Fresh, like someone was keeping score. 12 marks. Always 12. Claire's stomach dropped. "You ever figure out what they mean?" she asked. Renner's gaze locked onto hers. "I figured I didn't want to know. We closed the case in '88. Called it an unsolved disappearance. Folks stopped asking, mostly. Safer that way." He leaned closer, voice rough. "But you stir up those ashes, you're gonna choke on the smoke. Some things are meant to stay buried." Claire felt the weight of his warning. Yet she also sensed the sheriff wanted her to keep digging. Maybe guilt had eaten at him all these years. "I can't stop," she said quietly. "Not now." Renner nodded once, as if he expected no less. Then his eyes clouded, his focus drifting. "Storm's coming," he muttered, staring past her. "It always comes back to the farm." The nurse appeared, touching Claire's arm. "That's enough for today." Claire thanked Renner, though he no longer seemed aware of her. She left with her recorder heavy in her pocket, his words heavier still. Night fell fast on the prairie. By the time Claire reached Willow Creek, the moon had risen, pale and watchful. She parked by the barn, her headlights carving long shadows across the fields. The farmhouse loomed, its windows black sockets. Inside, she lit her lantern and set it on the table, spreading Renner's interview notes before her. Taken. Lights in the fields. 12 tallies. The house creaked around her, the timbers shifting with the cool night air. She tried to focus, but unease gnawed at her. She couldn't shake the sheriff's final words. "Storm's coming." The lantern flickered. Claire froze. There was no draft, yet the flame guttered, stretching sideways as if pulled by an unseen breath. She rose slowly, her eyes drawn to the hallway. The cellar door stood ajar. Her throat tightened. She was certain she had bolted it. "Hello?" she called, voice thin. No reply. She grabbed the lantern and stepped toward the cellar. The air grew colder as she descended, the dirt floor crunching beneath her boots. The chair sat where it always had, its shadow long on the wall. But something new caught her eye, a faint line of footprints in the dirt, leading from the stairs toward the far wall. She followed, holding the lantern low. The prints ended at the stone foundation. Except Claire crouched. A section of the wall looked different. The mortar cracked, the stones uneven. She pressed her hand against it. The stone shifted just slightly, hollow behind it, a hidden passage. Her pulse thundered. She set the lantern down, tugged at the loose stone. It scraped free, revealing darkness beyond. She lifted the lantern and peered in. A narrow tunnel stretched into the earth, the walls damp and lined with roots. The air smelled of rot and old water. She whispered into her recorder, "There's a concealed passage beneath the cellar. Appears man-made. Extent unknown." She crawled through, her shoulders brushing dirt. The tunnel curved, the air growing colder with each step. Then the space widened into a small chamber. Her lantern light revealed the walls, covered in more tallies. Hundreds of them. Claire's breath caught. The marks were carved deep, overlapping, endless, some fresh, some faded. In the center of the chamber lay a bundle of fabric. She knelt, heart pounding, and unfolded it. A dress. Faded cotton, the hem stained dark with age. A woman's shoe lay beside it, cracked with time. Her hands shook as she recognized the description from the file. Evelyn Clark's Sunday dress. She recoiled, bile rising in her throat. Someone had dragged her here, kept her here. The lantern sputtered again. She spun, terrified it might go out. A whisper brushed the chamber, low, almost human. Claire backed into the tunnel, clutching the lantern. The whisper followed, curling against her ears like cold smoke. She scrambled through the narrow passage, heart hammering, until she burst back into the cellar. She slammed the stone back into place, chest heaving. For a long time, she sat on the cellar steps, gripping the recorder with white knuckles. Her voice was barely audible when she spoke. They didn't vanish. They were taken, and they were kept here above her. The farmhouse groaned as if it had heard and approved. The morning light was thin, watery, as though the land itself hadn't slept. Claire's eyes felt the same. She hadn't managed more than an hour of restless dozing after crawling out of the tunnel. The images clung to her like damp clothing. The endless tallies, the faded cotton dress, the whisper curling through the dark. She replayed her recording over coffee at the kitchen table. Her own voice sounded alien. They didn't vanish. They were taken, and they were kept here. Her hands trembled around the mug. She knew what she had to do. The Brenham Sheriff's Office sat on Main Street, wedged between a pawn shop and a feed store. The place smelled of stale coffee and old paper. Deputy Carla Ruiz, the desk sergeant, looked up when Claire entered. Young, sharp-eyed, her badge glinting in the fluorescent light. "Help you?" Claire introduced herself, slid her notebook across the counter. "I've been investigating the disappearance of John and Evelyn Clark. I think I found evidence on the property. You'll want to see this." Ruiz scanned the notes, brow furrowing. "Scratches in a cellar? Old clothes. Miss Donovan, people leave junk behind. Doesn't mean it's a crime scene. They weren't just scratches. They were tallies, dozens of them. And the dress matches what Evelyn was last seen wearing. That's not junk." Ruiz leaned back skeptical. "You got proof it's hers? Tags, labels, DNA?" Claire felt frustration rising. Sheriff Renner knew. He told me he saw those same tallies in '87. Why wasn't that in the report? Ruiz stiffened. Renner's not well. Half the time he doesn't remember his breakfast. I wouldn't put much stock in what he says now. Claire bristled. So you're telling me the county just lets families disappear without answers? Again and again. The deputy's gaze cooled. I'm telling you, this county doesn't need old wounds reopened by outsiders chasing ghost stories. If you really think you've got something, bring it to Austin. Let the state labs dig through it. Her tone made it clear. Claire wasn't welcome here. Claire gathered her notes, jaw tight. I will. Outside, the sun glared off the courthouse windows. She leaned against her car, pulse pounding. The deputy's dismissal stung, but more than that, it confirmed what she feared. The town didn't want this solved. They wanted it forgotten. By dusk, the farmhouse waited with its hollow windows and sagging porch. Claire carried her lantern inside, determined not to be afraid. She'd spent the afternoon photographing the tunnel entrance, the dress, the shoe, every tally mark she could reach. She'd uploaded the files to cloud storage, insurance, in case someone tried to silence her. Now she meant to map the tunnel itself. She needed to know how far it went. The cellar smelled damper than before, the earth holding last night's rain. Claire lit her lantern and crouched by the stone. It shifted under her touch, almost eager to open. She froze. She hadn't touched it since last night. But the stone moved easier, as if loosened from inside. A pulse of dread rippled through her. She pushed it aside anyway and slid into the tunnel. The air pressed close, damp against her skin. She forced herself forward, counting her breaths. 1, 2, 3. The tallies in the chamber glowed under the lantern light, thousands of them. She ignored the shiver crawling her spine and pressed deeper. The passage narrowed, then split into 2 forks. Claire cursed under her breath. She hadn't expected branching tunnels. Left or right? She chose left. The tunnel sloped downward, the air colder, rank with rot. Her lantern beam caught on something, a length of rusted chain bolted to the wall. At its end lay a scrap of fabric, torn and blackened with age. Her stomach clenched. Someone had been held here. A whisper brushed the back of her neck. She spun, lantern trembling. The tunnel behind her was empty, but the whisper lingered, almost a sigh. She forced herself onward, every nerve screaming. The passage curved, then ended abruptly at a wooden door set into the earth. The wood was old, swollen with damp, iron hinges streaked with rust. Claire's hand shook as she touched the latch. It resisted, then gave with a groan. The door opened into a chamber larger than the last. Her lantern-lit walls lined with shelves. On them sat boxes, glass jars, stacks of yellowing paper. She stepped inside. The floor crunched under her boots. Brittle bones scattered across the dirt. Tiny bones. Not human, she told herself, but her stomach rebelled. She raised the lantern to the shelves. The jars held cloudy liquid, inside which floated things she couldn't name. Gray lumps, fragments of something organic. The papers were covered in faded handwriting, page after page of tallies, dates, and names she couldn't quite decipher. She lifted one page. The ink had bled, but she could make out the words, Evelyn. 1987. Taken. Her breath caught. A noise jolted her. Footsteps in the tunnel. She whipped around, lantern beam trembling. Who's there? Silence. But the footsteps had been real, she was sure. Her hand groped for her recorder. Date, October 19th. I found a chamber beneath the farmhouse. Records, jars, bones. Someone has been cataloging the disappearances. Evelyn Clark is listed. I think... A sharp crack echoed. The lantern guttered. The chamber plunged into darkness. Claire froze, heart slamming. The whisper came again, louder this time, curling against her ear. Stay. Her scream died in her throat. She fumbled for the lantern, shaking it until the flame caught again. Light spilled across the shelves. But the papers were gone. The jars, the boxes, the bones, all gone. The chamber was empty. Claire staggered backward, chest heaving. Had she imagined it all? Number. She felt the paper still in her pocket. She yanked it out. The ink blurred, but Evelyn's name remained. Proof. She bolted for the tunnel, lantern swinging wildly. The whispers followed, rising like a chorus, hissing along the walls. By the time she burst into the cellar, she was gasping, sweat slick on her skin. She slammed the stone shut and collapsed against the steps. Her recorder was still running. The playback would prove she hadn't dreamed it. But when she rewound, the tape held only her own panicked breathing. No whispers, no footsteps, no words. Just silence. Claire pressed her forehead to the cool wood of the cellar door, fighting tears. The farmhouse was erasing itself, and it wanted her to know. The paper in her pocket felt heavier than stone. Claire unfolded it again over breakfast, staring at the smeared ink. Evelyn, 1987. Taken. No matter how many times she read it, her brain struggled to accept that she had pulled this record from beneath her own house. If the farmhouse had been cataloging the dead, or if someone had used it to do so, she needed context. She needed history. The Brenham Historical Society operated out of a converted Victorian home near the courthouse. The place smelled of dust and lemon polish, with sunlight spilling across display cases of pioneer tools and yellowed photographs. Behind the desk sat Dr. Henry Caldwell, thin and precise, with half-moon glasses perched low on his nose. Claire introduced herself and explained her interest in Willow Creek Farm. Caldwell's expression tightened as though she had spoken a curse. "That property has been nothing but grief," he said, shuffling papers. "Why drag it up again?" "Because people keep disappearing from it. 4 families at least." You must know that his eyes flicked toward the shelves, then back to her. "There are stories. But you should understand, Brenham was built on stories. German settlers, Comanche raids, droughts, fires. Sometimes tragedy simply belongs to the land." Claire leaned forward. "I don't think these are just tragedies. I think Willow Creek has a pattern. And I think it started long before Evelyn Clark Caldwell studied her." Then sighed, pushing back his chair. "Follow me." He led her into a back room, walls lined with maps and leather-bound ledgers. He pulled one ledger down, opening to a brittle page. The property was first recorded in 1854, granted to a man named Silas Kerr. He ran cattle and corn until his wife and 3 children vanished one winter. Neighbors claimed Comanche took them, but the tribe hadn't raided in years. Silas was found hanged in his barn the next spring. Caldwell flipped a few pages. The farm passed to a family named Adlers. 2 sons went missing in 1871. Never found. The widow sold the land cheap. More pages turned, more names, each with its own whispered calamity. "Do you see?" Caldwell asked quietly. "Every generation, the land swallows someone. The Clarks were only the latest." Claire's throat was dry. "Why hasn't this history been spoken about openly?" Caldwell closed the ledger with a soft thud. "Because people prefer silence to fear. And because some say the land chooses those who dig too deep. My advice? Stop digging." But Claire only saw confirmation. The pattern wasn't paranoia. It was fact, written in ink more than a century old. She left with photographs of the ledger pages stuffed into her bag. By the time twilight fell, the farmhouse stood waiting again. Claire drove slowly up the gravel lane, nerves on edge. The porch light she'd left on was dark. She stepped inside. The air felt charged, thick with anticipation. She lit her lantern, the glow cutting through dust motes. The silence pressed close. Her recorder clicked on. October 20th. Records confirmed disappearances tied to Willow Creek dating back to the 1850s. At least 6 families erased. Land appears cursed or deliberately used to conceal crimes across generations. She set the lantern on the table, spreading her photos of the ledger. She traced the names with her finger, whispering them aloud. Silas Kerr, the Adlers, the Harts, the Clarks. Her voice seemed to echo strangely, as though the house repeated each name back to her. A thud jolted her. From outside, Claire froze. The sound came again, the creak of the porch steps. Someone was out there. She grabbed the lantern and crossed to the door, pulse hammering. She eased it open. The night was still, the field silvered by moonlight. Empty. Then, movement at the corner of her vision. A shadow slipping around the barn. "Hello?" Her voice cracked. No answer. She set the lantern down, fumbling for the heavy iron poker by the fireplace. Gripping it tight, she stepped onto the porch. The boards groaned under her weight. The barn loomed, its doors yawning dark. She forced herself closer, heart thudding in her throat. Inside, the air smelled of hay and rust. Moonlight streamed through broken slats. The silence was thick. She swung the lantern beam across the space. Empty stalls, dust swirling. Nothing. She lowered the poker, exhaling shaky relief. And then she saw it, carved fresh into the barn wall, a single tally mark, deep and raw. Her blood went cold. Someone had been here. Someone alive. She spun toward the door, but movement caught her eye. A figure stood at the edge of the field, just beyond the reach of the lantern's glow. Tall, motionless, watching. "Who are you?" she shouted, voice trembling. The figure didn't move. Claire took a step forward, lifting the poker. The lantern sputtered. She blinked, and the figure was gone. Only the wind stirred the corn stalks. She stumbled back into the house, bolting the door. Her breath came ragged. Her recorder was still running on the table. She picked it up, whispering, "Not just history. Someone is here now. They're marking time, and they're watching me." The lantern guttered again, as if in agreement. Claire couldn't shake the image of the figure in the field. It clung to her through the night, through her restless dreams, until she woke tangled in sweat-damp sheets with the sunrise bleeding pale light across the walls. She told herself it had been her imagination. Her mind, primed by too many hours in dusty archives, had conjured a watcher out of shadows. But when she went to the barn, the tally carved into the wall remained, raw, fresh, a mark meant for her. She touched it with trembling fingers. Whoever had been there wasn't a ghost. They were flesh and blood. And they wanted her to know it. She spent the morning at a diner in town, the kind where everyone knew everyone else, and strangers were clocked the moment they walked in. Conversations dimmed when she entered. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Claire sat at the counter, ordered coffee she didn't taste, and opened her notebook. She was halfway through outlining the tunnel chamber when the stool beside her creaked. A man sat down, 60, maybe older. Weathered face, gray hair tucked under a feed cap. His hands were thick, scarred. "You're the girl staying out at the Clark place," he said. It wasn't a question. Claire kept her tone even. "I bought it, yes." His gaze fixed on her notebook. "And you're asking questions, digging where you don't belong. People vanished out there," she said. "I'm trying to understand why." He gave a small, humorless chuckle. "You think you'll find answers in that house? Better folks than you have tried. Then tell me what you know," she pressed. He shook his head. "Some things ain't meant to be written down. Ain't meant to be said neither. You stir 'em up, they stick to you." You'll see Claire felt a chill, though his words weren't shouted, weren't even hostile. They were calm, inevitable. "Why do you care if I dig?" she asked. For the first time, his eyes met hers, and something cold flickered there. "Because when the land takes, it doesn't stop at one. You'll drag more down with you, maybe even us." He slid off the stool. leaving coins on the counter, and walked out without looking back. Claire sat frozen, the coffee cooling untouched before her. By nightfall, the farmhouse had grown unbearable. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was thick, weighted, like breath on the back of her neck. She lit the lantern, its glow barely holding back the shadows. Her recorder clicked on. October 21st. A local man approached me at the diner. Warned me I'm endangering others by digging into this. Suggested the land doesn't stop once it starts taking. His words implied it's a cycle, one that will continue through me. She set the recorder down, hands trembling. The tallies, the tunnel, the ledger, the warnings. They weren't disconnected fragments. They were parts of a pattern stretching across centuries, pulling her into its orbit. She rubbed her eyes, exhausted. When she opened them, the lantern light had dimmed. No, not dimmed, shifted. The shadows had lengthened, bending strangely across the walls. They no longer matched the angles of furniture or beams. Instead, they stretched upward, tall and thin, like figures. Claire's breath caught. She blinked hard. The shapes didn't vanish. They multiplied, filling the corners of the room. "No," she whispered. "No, this isn't real." The recorder captured her words, her ragged breathing. The lantern flame flickered wildly, though there was no draft. One of the shadows shifted its head. Claire's body went cold. She grabbed the lantern and stumbled back, but the shadows seemed to move with her, stretching, reaching. Her pulse roared in her ears. She bolted for the porch, throwing the door open. Night air hit her like ice. The fields shimmered under the moonlight, endless rows of corn whispering. But the whisper wasn't the wind. It was voices, dozens of them, rising and falling in a broken chorus. Claire staggered into the yard, lantern shaking. The voices swelled, words indistinct but desperate, as if calling from beneath the earth. She clutched her head, fighting to stay upright. Then she saw them, figures standing at the edge of the field. Dozens, unmoving, watching. Her lantern sputtered, guttered. Darkness swallowed her. She screamed, and the recorder on the table inside caught only silence. She woke on the porch at dawn, her clothes damp with dew, the lantern cold in her hand. The yard was empty. The fields were still. She stumbled inside, throat raw, recorder still blinking red on the table. She pressed play. Static. Then her own voice whispering, "No, this isn't real." After that, nothing. The part where she had seen the shadows, heard the voices, run into the yard. All gone. Erased. Her hands shook as she stopped the tape. The farmhouse wasn't just haunted. It was choosing what stayed, choosing what she remembered, and it was winning. The church bells of St. Andrew's rang across Brenham as Claire parked on the square. Sunday morning. Families in pressed shirts and dresses filed inside, murmuring greetings. Their faces were familiar to one another, but each glance at her was sharp, cautious. Outsider. Stranger in their story. Claire waited until the service ended. When the congregation spilled into sunlight, she approached the pastor, a white-haired man with a measured smile and a Bible tucked under his arm. "Reverend Hill?" she asked. He nodded. "And you must be Miss Donovan. I've heard you've taken an interest in Willow Creek. More than an interest," Claire said. "I'm living in that farmhouse." The smile slipped. His eyes darkened. "Why would you do that?" "Because people vanish there. The Clarks, the Prices, the Millers. I want to know why the pastor exhaled, shoulders sagging. Why dredge up sorrow that can't be fixed? Their families made peace long ago. You should too. Peace?" Claire's voice sharpened. "How can you make peace with bodies that were never buried, with names that were erased?" Hill's gaze hardened. "Because sometimes remembering feeds the fire. Best to let ashes cool." The words echoed Caldwell's warning. Silence as preservation. But Claire was done with silence. Tell me, Reverend, do you believe in curses? His lips pressed thin. I believe in sin. And I believe in land that remembers blood. He leaned closer, voice low. And if you don't leave soon, I believe you'll understand both. That afternoon, she knocked on doors along County Road 215, where the Prices had lived. Most slammed shut. A few muttered, "Don't bring that up." Finally, an old woman with clouded eyes cracked her screen door. "Curtis and Helen were good people," the woman whispered. "I told the deputies back then. I heard them screaming." The night they went, screaming in the fields. Her voice broke. "Nobody believed me." Claire's pen stilled. "Did you ever see anything?" The woman's hands trembled. Shapes, like shadows moving against the corn. But shadows don't scream. People do. The door shut before Claire could ask more. By the time she drove back, dusk bled across the sky. The farmhouse sat in silhouette, jagged and hungry. She lit the lantern, but its glow seemed weaker than before. The shadows clung heavier to the corners. Her recorder clicked on. October 22nd. The town knows more than it admits. Pastor Hill spoke of land that remembers blood. A neighbor claims she heard the Prices screaming the night they disappeared. The silence isn't natural. It's protection. A pact of forgetting. She closed her notebook, exhaustion dragging at her. The farmhouse pressed around her like a vice. The air was thick, heavy. She curled on the sofa, lantern burning low, and drifted. Sleep came jagged. She dreamed of fields that stretched forever, tall corn swaying. Shapes moved between the stalks, whispering her name. "Claire! Claire!" She ran, the earth sucking at her feet. A figure appeared ahead. Evelyn Clark, her Sunday dress torn, her face pale. She reached for Claire, mouth opening, but no sound came out. Then Evelyn's skin split like paper, peeling away to reveal only tally marks carved into flesh. They spread like veins, covering her entire body, until she collapsed into the soil. Claire woke with a scream, heart racing. The lantern had gone out. Darkness smothered the room. She groped for matches, hands shaking. When the flame caught, she froze. The tallies, they covered the walls. Dozens, hundreds, etched deep into plaster and wood, climbing to the ceiling. No. Her voice trembled. She staggered back. The tallies seemed to pulse, as though carved freshly, each one alive. She blinked hard, fighting tears. When she looked again, the walls were bare. Her knees buckled. The house wasn't just haunting her. It was bending her mind, molding her fear into visions too vivid to dismiss. She picked up the recorder, whispering, "The house shows me things, dreams, marks that vanish when I wake. It's not memory, it's manipulation. I don't know what's real anymore." From the cellar came a sound, soft at first, then rising, scraping, long, steady, like a nail carving another tally into stone. Claire covered her mouth to keep from crying out. The sound didn't stop. It marked again and again, counting her. Claire sat at the farmhouse table, the morning sun pouring through dirty glass, trying to convince herself she had imagined the scraping in the cellar. She played back the recorder from the night before, hoping for proof. Only silence. But her notebook told a different story. Jagged lines scribbled across the page, words she didn't remember writing. "It's counting me. It knows my name." Her stomach tightened. She hadn't dreamed that. She needed to leave the farmhouse. Just for a few hours, air, distance, something to remind her of reality. The road to town was quiet, lined with barbed wire fences and grazing cattle. Claire gripped the wheel, her recorder resting on the seat beside her. She'd arranged to meet a contact in Austin, someone who could help authenticate the fabric she'd found in the tunnel. Proof. But halfway down County Road 215, A pickup truck roared into her rearview mirror. Old, rust-pocked, its headlights glaring. It closed fast, riding her bumper. Claire's grip tightened on the wheel. She tapped the brakes. The truck surged closer, metal nearly kissing metal. "Jesus!" she muttered. The road narrowed. No shoulder, only ditches and fields. The truck swerved left, pulling alongside. For a moment she glimpsed the driver, a man in a cap, face shadowed. He didn't look at her. He looked straight ahead, jaw set, as though this wasn't a game. The truck swerved toward her. Tires screamed. Claire yanked the wheel, barely holding the lane. Her heart pounded. The driver leaned on the horn, then surged ahead. Gravel spat from his tires as he cut in front of her and slammed the brakes. Claire jerked the wheel right. The car skidded, tires biting dirt, before she wrestled it to a stop inches from the ditch. By the time she steadied her breath, the truck was gone, swallowed by dust. She sat shaking, forehead pressed to the wheel. It wasn't the house this time. Someone wanted her off this case. Alive or not, they were watching. She drove back to Willow Creek on trembling legs, her trip to Austin abandoned. The farmhouse seemed almost smug as it rose before her, paint peeling in the harsh afternoon sun. She stepped inside, the air cool and damp. For the first time, she wondered if she was safer here than on the road. But night came fast, and safety in Willow Creek was an illusion. The lantern burned low, throwing pale light across the walls. Claire sat on the sofa, recorder running, whispering her thoughts. October 23rd. A truck forced me off the road. Someone doesn't want me taking this evidence out of Brenham. That means it's real, which means I'm close. The farmhouse? She stopped. The air had changed. Thick, charged. Her skin prickled. From upstairs came a sound, a voice. Soft female. "John?" Claire froze, blood rushing in her ears. The voice came again, clearer. "John, are you there?" "Evelyn." It was Evelyn's voice. Her body moved before her mind could stop it. She grabbed the lantern and climbed the stairs, each step creaking beneath her. At the top, the sewing room door stood open. Inside, the air was colder, sharp as ice. The lantern flame wavered. "John?" The voice again, tremulous. Claire's throat tightened. "Evelyn?" she whispered. The lantern flickered, light stretching across the wall, where a shadow stood. A woman's silhouette. The figure turned. For an instant, Claire saw her, pale face, torn dress, eyes wide with pleading. Then the lantern went out. Darkness swallowed the room. Claire's scream stuck in her throat. She fumbled for matches, her hands shaking so violently she dropped them. Something brushed her arm. Light, like fingertips. She staggered back into the hall, gasping. The lantern sputtered back to life on its own, flame steady now, the sewing room empty. Her recorder in her pocket had caught everything, her voice, her footsteps, her whisper. But no Evelyn. No voice but her own. She pressed her hands to her face, shaking. The farmhouse wasn't just showing her things, it was feeding her fragments, half-truths, lies, whatever it needed to keep her here. Downstairs, the cellar door groaned open on its own. Claire stared at it, heart hammering. The darkness below seemed to breathe. She knew if she went down, she might not come back. And yet, every part of her felt pulled toward it, like the house was calling her name. The diner was quieter than usual when Claire walked in. Heads turned, conversations thinned, then resumed at a lower volume. The scrape of cutlery seemed louder than the voices. She ignored them and walked straight to the booth where Sheriff Booker sat alone, nursing black coffee. His eyes narrowed when he saw her. "You look like hell," he said flatly. "Your county tried to run me off the road yesterday." Claire shot back, sliding into the booth. "You know who it was?" His jaw worked. "I told you, Miss Donovan." "You don't know what you're messing with. I found Evelyn's dress," she whispered, leaning in. In the tunnel under that house, with her name written in a ledger. Don't tell me you don't know Booker's hand tightened around his cup. His gaze dropped, then lifted again. My father was there in '87. He told me what he saw right before he died. He said the Clarks were taken, and he said the town let it happen. Claire's blood ran cold. Let it happen. Booker's voice was low, bitter. Every generation the land takes, people vanish. You can fight it, or you can let it happen and move on. My father, he made his choice. Covering it up? Claire pressed. Protecting the rest of us? His eyes burned into hers. Don't you get it? If you keep stirring, it won't just be you. It'll take more. That's how it works. Claire shook her head. You'd rather sacrifice a few than admit the truth. His silence was answer enough. She slid out of the booth, fury knotting in her chest. You've been counting bodies for 100 years and calling it protection. I'm not leaving until the truth is out. Booker didn't stop her, but his voice followed as she left. Truth won't save you. It'll bury you. The farmhouse felt heavier than ever when she returned. The walls seemed closer, the windows darker. She barely paused before lighting her lantern and going straight to the cellar. The stone slid aside easily, like the house wanted her to pass. She crawled into the tunnel, recorder running, breath loud in her ears. The chamber with the tallies seemed smaller now, the marks pressing in on her. She pressed on to the fork, this time choosing the right passage. The air grew colder, damp with decay. Her lantern flame shivered. The passage opened into another chamber, larger. The walls here weren't carved with tallies. They were covered with names, dozens of them etched deep into stone. Claire raised the lantern, scanning. Joseph Miller, Ruth Miller, Martha Hughes, Curtis Price, Helen Price, John Clark, Evelyn Clark. Her throat tightened. The missing weren't forgotten. They had been recorded, claimed. She stepped farther in, heart pounding. At the center of the chamber stood something new, a wooden table. On it lay bones, arranged with deliberate care. Not buried, displayed. She gagged, covering her mouth. Her lantern beam caught on something metallic nailed to the wall above the table. A key, rusted but unmistakably real. Her hand trembled as she reached for it. When her fingers closed around the cold iron, the whispering began again. This time, it wasn't faint. It was all around her. Voices overlapping, rising, as though the walls themselves were speaking. Stay, stay, stay. Claire backed toward the tunnel, clutching the key, lantern shaking wildly. The whispers grew sharper, louder, until they weren't whispers at all, but screams. She stumbled into the passage, scrambling on hands and knees, the voices clawing at her mind. The lantern sputtered. For a heartbeat, the light went out. In the dark, something brushed her back. Fingers. She shrieked, lunging forward until the lantern flared again. She scrambled into the cellar, slammed the stone shut, and collapsed against the steps, sobbing. The voices faded. The house was quiet again. She opened her fist. The key dug into her palm, cutting skin. Proof. Something solid, something the house hadn't erased. Her recorder still blinked red. Her voice cracked as she spoke. October 24th. I found a chamber, names carved into stone. The missing are all there, and I found a key. I don't know what it opens. But it's real, and it's mine upstairs. The front door banged shut on its own, as though the farmhouse had just locked her in. Claire didn't sleep. She sat at the table, the key in front of her, her recorder beside it. Every creak of the farmhouse seemed amplified, each gust of wind another presence circling her. Her pen scratched furiously across the page. Names carved into stone. Ledger in the wall. Sheriff admits a pact of silence. Truck on the road proves someone is still protecting this secret. She stared at the key. Heavy, rusted, real. It had to fit something inside this house, something the farmhouse didn't want her to open. At dawn, she began searching. She tried every lock upstairs, cupboards, wardrobes, a locked trunk in the sewing room. Nothing. The key was too large, too old. It belonged to something hidden deeper. By noon, she stood again in the cellar, lantern lit, air damp and heavy. She pressed her palm to the stone wall where she had first discovered the sliding panel. It shifted again, as if eager. She crawled through the tunnel, past the tallies, past the chamber of names. She stopped where the passage narrowed once more. There, half buried in dirt, was an iron door. Its surface was pitted, scarred, almost indistinguishable from the stone. Only the outline betrayed it. Her hands shook as she raised the key. The lock resisted, corroded by decades, but with a groan it turned. The door swung inward. Cold air poured out. Not just cold, rancid, the stench of rot, old and unending. Claire gagged, pulling her scarf over her mouth, lantern trembling in her grip. She stepped through. The chamber was larger than the others, its ceiling arched low, beams sagging under the weight of the earth above. Bones filled the space, not scattered, stacked, carefully, almost reverently, lining the walls in rows. Human bones, long yellowed, piled so high they nearly touched the beams. Claire's knees weakened. She whispered into her recorder, voice trembling. Dozens, maybe hundreds. The missing aren't missing, they're here. At the far end of the chamber, something else. A chair, wooden, broken, bound with rope and rusted shackles. The seat stained dark. Beside it, a table. On it lay objects that didn't belong together. A child's shoe, a wedding ring, a pair of cracked spectacles. Tokens of lives erased. The lantern flame flickered. Claire's breath caught. One of the bones shifted. Then another. A clatter echoed through the chamber as the piles trembled, as though stirred by some invisible force. Stay. The whisper came from everywhere at once. Louder this time. More voices joining, weaving together into a chorus. Stay. Stay. Claire stumbled backward, her lantern beam sweeping across skulls staring eyeless at her. The whispers rose into shrieks. She turned to run, but the iron door slammed shut behind her. Her recorder slipped from her hand, clattering across stone. Its red light blinked, steady, unbothered. "Let me out!" she screamed, pounding the door. "You can't have me!" The chamber shook. Dust rained from above. The bones toppled in waves, collapsing like surf. A skull struck her shoulder, sending her sprawling. In the glow of her fallen lantern, she saw them. Figures forming out of shadow between the piles, faces pale and familiar from photographs. John and Evelyn Clark, Joseph and Ruth Miller, Helen Price, and behind them, smaller, frailer, a child with braids, eyes blank. They reached for her, not with malice, with need. Claire's scream echoed off the stone as the lantern flame guttered, darkness surging. Her last thought before it swallowed her was that Sheriff Booker had been right. Truth doesn't save, it buries. Days later, a rancher passing Willow Creek saw the farmhouse door ajar. Inside, the rooms were empty. Claire's car still sat in the drive. Her bag, recorder, and notes lay on the kitchen table. The recorder was still running. The last file captured hours of static until a faint whisper threaded through. Her own voice. "I'm here." The news broke quietly. A 2-paragraph article buried in the Brenham Gazette's back pages. Local journalist missing at historic farm Claire Donovan, 34, of Houston, was reported missing after failing to return from an investigation at the abandoned Willow Creek farm. Her car and personal belongings were found on the property. Law enforcement has opened an inquiry, though no foul play is suspected at this time. The story was picked up by regional outlets, then true crime blogs. The disappearance of an investigator while researching a cold case had a neat symmetry that headlines loved. Within days, forums buzzed with speculation. Some blamed Sheriff Booker, claiming he silenced her like his father had done in 1987. Others accused locals of protecting a dark family secret. A smaller, more fervent circle insisted Willow Creek was cursed land, that Donovan had become another name etched into its stone. The sheriff's office issued statements, measured and thin. Search teams combed the property and surrounding woods, Booker told reporters, jaw tight. We found no signs of struggle, no indication of foul play. Ms. Donovan's vehicle was operable. It's possible she left on her own, but when pressed, he admitted something unsettling. The recorder she left behind contained unusual audio, he said, mostly static, but there were fragments. We've submitted them for analysis, he wouldn't say more. Behind closed doors, deputies whispered. Some had refused to join the search in the tunnels, swearing the ground itself felt alive. Others claimed they heard their names whispered in the dark. One young deputy resigned the next day, telling his wife he wouldn't set foot on that land again. The farmhouse remained standing. Locals drove faster when they passed it, eyes fixed on the road. Some swore lights flickered in its windows at night. One rancher told the paper he'd seen a woman's silhouette in the upstairs sewing room. Another claimed he heard a voice calling from the porch. John? Are you there? The property was posted for auction 3 months later. No bidders came forward. The sign still leans at the end of the drive, letters fading. Claire Donovan's family released a statement. We are devastated by Claire's disappearance. She was dedicated to uncovering the truth, no matter how difficult. Her courage and compassion will not be forgotten. Her sister, Anna, later spoke in a podcast interview. I don't think she left on her own, Anna said. Claire wasn't the type to run away. She left her bag, her wallet, her car. She left her story unfinished. That wasn't her. When asked about the recorder, Anna's voice faltered. I've heard the files. The last one isn't just static. If you listen with headphones, you can hear her. You can hear her say, I'm here. The cold cases of John and Evelyn Clark were briefly reopened. Cadaver dogs were brought to Willow Creek, their handlers confident. The animals refused to enter the cellar. They whined, tails between their legs, and had to be dragged back to their vans. The case stalled again. No bodies were recovered. No one could explain the dress fabric Claire had collected, or the rusted key logged into evidence. The key fit no lock in the farmhouse. The evidence sat in cardboard boxes, sealed, waiting for someone with authority to reopen them. In the years since, Willow Creek has become a footnote in true crime anthologies, the kind reserved for haunted cases. The farmhouse that ate its own investigator. Paranormal channels on YouTube have made it a staple, their thumbnails screaming "Cursed Texas House" with arrows pointing to blurry windows. They overlay static-heavy audio clips, claiming to hear Evelyn Clark's voice or Claire's. Skeptics dismiss it as hysteria, confirmation bias, or rural legend. But those who live nearby still cross themselves when they drive past the empty property. They know the history. They know the names carved into stone. And when the wind cuts across the fields at night, carrying voices no one wants to hear, they keep their windows rolled up and their radios loud. Some nights, in the archives of Claire Donovan's podcast channel, subscribers report a new upload appearing briefly before vanishing. A single audio file, title blank. When they click, it's always the same. 47 minutes of silence. Then, near the end, a faint whisper. Not static, not distortion. A woman's voice, familiar and trembling. Don't come here.